The morning they taped the bright orange notice to my truck was the morning I realized just how far a little power can go in the wrong hands. It flapped against my windshield in the cold Ontario wind like a warning flag. Vehicle banned from private community road. Immediate removal required. I stood there in my steel-toed boots, coffee still warm in my hand, staring at words that felt like a slap across the face. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to check, was that the private community road they were so eager to control was legally mine. I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble. I moved to this quiet subdivision outside Ottawa 5 years ago after my divorce. I needed a fresh start. The place wasn't fancy, rows of tidy townhouses, trimmed hedges, polite waves that rarely turned into conversations. I worked long hours as a contractor, driving my old black pickup loaded with tools. It wasn't shiny or new, but it fed my kids and paid the mortgage. That truck carried more than lumber and ladders. It carried my second chance. The Homeowners Association had always been particular. Garbage bins had to be tucked in by 7 p.m. Lawns couldn't grow past a certain height. Holiday lights had a tasteful limit. I followed the rules, mostly. But I guess my truck didn't fit their picture-perfect image. It had scratches, a bit of rust near the bumper, and sometimes drywall dust in the bed. To them, it looked like disruption. To me, it looked like survival. The first warning came in the mail. Commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked overnight on community property. I read it twice. Community property. That phrase again. I checked the documents from when I bought the place. Most people in the subdivision didn't know the history, but before the developer divided the land, the access road had belonged to the original farmhouse property. That farmhouse lot, mine, still included legal ownership of the road, with a registered easement allowing neighbors to use it. They had the right to pass through. They didn't own it. The HOA certainly didn't. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I emailed the board politely, attaching a copy of my land survey. No response. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one carried a fine, $300 for non-compliance. I felt my chest tighten. $300 might not mean much to the folks driving Teslas and Audi SUVs around here, but to me, that was groceries and gas for 2 weeks. The next board meeting was held in the community clubhouse. I walked in wearing my work jacket, hands rough and cracked from winter jobs. Conversations hushed. I explained calmly that the road was legally part of my property. I showed the documents. The HOA president, a sharply dressed woman named Denise, barely glanced at them. "This is a shared private road maintained by the association," she said firmly. "We enforce standards to protect property values." I remember swallowing hard before replying. "You maintain it because I allow it. There's an easement for access, not ownership. There's a difference." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked annoyed, as if I was the problem for pointing out facts. Denise closed the folder and said they would review the matter. The fine remained. 2 days later, I came home to find my truck towed. That was the moment something inside me cracked. It wasn't just about the truck. It was about being dismissed, talked down to, treated like I didn't belong because I didn't fit their version of success. I stood in the empty driveway, snow starting to fall, and felt that old familiar sting, the one from my divorce, from years of feeling not good enough. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I called a lawyer in town, who specialized in property disputes. I laid everything out: the deed, the easement, the letters, the towing receipt. He leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. "They made a big mistake," he said. Within a week, a formal legal notice was sent to the HOA. It cited the provincial land registry, easement law, and wrongful towing. It demanded reimbursement for towing fees, cancellation of fines, and a written apology. It also reminded them that any interference with my lawful use of my own property could result in further legal action. The reaction was swift. Suddenly, Denise wanted to have a conversation. The board called an emergency meeting. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet started knocking on my door. Some apologized. One older couple admitted they had no idea the road wasn't owned by the HOA. "We just assumed," they said. That word, assumed, echoed in my mind. They assumed my truck lowered their standards. They assumed I didn't understand the law. They assumed I'd back down. At the next meeting, the tone had changed. Denise's voice lacked its usual edge. The HOA agreed to drop all fines and reimburse my expenses. They even offered to revise their parking rules to clarify that they applied only to common property. It wasn't dramatic. There was no cheering, just quiet acknowledgement that they had overstepped. But the real victory wasn't in the apology letter I received a week later. It was in something deeper. A few days after everything settled, I was loading my truck early in the morning when one of my neighbors, a younger dad I'd barely spoken to before, walked over. He looked at my tools and said, "You know, my deck's falling apart. I've been meaning to fix it. Think you could take a look?" It was a small thing, but it meant something. Over the next few months, more neighbors started treating me differently. Not as the guy with the ugly truck, not as the rule breaker, but as someone who built things. Someone who understood the bones of the land they lived on. Someone who stood up for himself without tearing everyone else down. I never wanted to fight my neighbors. I just wanted fairness, respect. Sometimes in Canada, we pride ourselves on being polite, on keeping the peace. But peace without fairness isn't peace at all. It's quiet injustice. And sometimes the most Canadian thing you can do isn't to apologize and step aside, it's to calmly say, "Actually, you're wrong," and back it up with truth. My truck still sits in my driveway every night, rust and all. When I drive down that road, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel grounded, because I know what I own. Not just the asphalt beneath my tires, but my voice. They tried to ban my truck from their road. They just didn't know it was mine.